the Fantasy Football Fanalist Podcast, presented by Fantasy Data. Here's your hosts, Billy Muzio and Bradley Stalder.
Welcome back, everybody. Billy and Bradley here with the Fantasy Football Fanalist, presented by Fantasy Data. And tonight's agenda, we'll be covering the fantasy impact of the NFL schedules. But before we welcome our guest and dive in, I'd like to direct your attention to our recent playlist edition on YouTube. Make sure to check out our rookie player cards, where we give a quick 2-minute segment on the 2021 rookie players. But more importantly, tonight's guest, Todd Burrows, at Todd from PA, is the host of Run to Daylight podcast. He's an FFPC veteran and participant of the Pros vs. Joes, although he will tell you he's working hard to be a Joe. He is considered a football analyst in the best ball format and does in-season DFS work with at 1 week season. Welcome to the show, Todd. Happy to have you here.
Billy, I couldn't be happier to be on your show. Nice to meet Bradley as well.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, Todd. Billy's been talking you up a lot, and I'm excited to dive into this schedule and discuss how this affects, a multitude of ways in which we play fantasy football.
Can I ask you something, Bradley?
Yeah.
Speaking of schedule, like who schedules a vasectomy the day of a podcast?
That's this guy over here.
It would not be me. That would not be me. No doctors getting anywhere close to that region with any tools that could in any way negatively impact anything for me. But I can't speak for my co-host.
I like those player cards that you do. Are those snipped?
They are snipped. Yeah. Snipped little snip bits. And I'd say they're a little bit smaller than some other items that we're discussing here, especially the swelling that could potentially be happening as I'm talking. I didn't even realize I scheduled it for a Friday, quite frankly. Like I was like, oh, great, I have a podcast and I have a vasectomy the same day, and so I'm sitting there, I'm like taking the medication they gave me, and I asked the doctor, I said, hey, am I gonna be okay to record tonight on this Valium Norca? He's like, yeah, you should be fine. And he's like, yeah, you might be a little loopy. I was like, great, it'll be a good show. Let's rock and roll.
We'll see how the podcast goes.
I'm just glad to not be hosting. I mean, literally, the balls are in your court.
Oh man, we're already like 3 ball puns in, and we're only at minute 3. This is fantastic.
We're averaging 1 ball pun a minute.
I promised an hour's worth of fun.
This is great.
I'm just gonna squeeze every last bit out of it.
4 in under 4 minutes. We're on fire here. All right, Bradley, what's on tonight's agenda?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the release of the NFL schedule, our first impressions, how does it impact our draft, and how does it impact our view of players throughout the season. So, we can talk about best ball first. Todd, I'll put you on the spot. In a best ball league, how significant do you take player schedule in when you're selecting players in similar tiers?
That's a good question. So in best ball, I'm concerned with bye weeks, and I use them as one of my tiebreakers to decide who to take within a tier. Typically, I don't want to have more than 2, maybe 3 wide receivers out of 7 or 8 with the same bye week. Same thing, with running back. Definitely don't want to have more than 2. And definitely you don't want to have quarterbacks if you're doing like an old-fashioned BB10 where you only take 2 quarterbacks. You're just giving away points that you shouldn't have to. In the regular season, I'm just completely the opposite. Football guys, I'll take, where I'm not building a whole portfolio. I'm less likely to tier draft, and I'm more likely to take my favorite guy that's on the board most rounds in those kind of drafts.
Yeah, for me, I'm similar here. It will be a tiebreaker for me as well, but more importantly, like when I'm looking at schedules, I like to say, hey, what favorable matchups do we have first and foremost in the beginning of the year to set me up for success to make playoffs in my fantasy leagues? And then lastly, I say, who has some favorable matchups into playoff time? You know, the final 4 weeks that you can exploit matchups and really gain the extra edge versus your competitors. You know, like for instance, like look at teams last year that was facing Dallas twice in the final, 3-4 weeks where it was just, I think it was Washington football team, right? Where people were just able to throw and run all over them to where you're able to exploit those matchups. So and if I'm in leagues where you can trade like FBG main events, you can't do so, but in like dynasty or regular leagues, I'm start looking at schedules around Halloween time, first week of November, and I start looking at people who I can trade for as well to try to get on my teams to have those favorable matchups.
You know, the interesting thing about Halloween is that, pumpkins are, really large balls.
They're gourds, but I mean, how do you lift it up? Actually, one of the things that I learned was you're not supposed to like cut around, the top of it. You're actually supposed to cut the bottom of it.
The pumpkin or Billy?
We'll leave that ambiguous for now, but that was also a pun. But you're supposed to cut the bottom because when you cut off the top, you're actually lifting it up. That's the natural handle that you handle the pumpkin with. So, fun fact:
you use a scalpel for that?
You can use a multitude of tools,
okay.
And
I prefer buck knives.
Exercise caution.
Yeah.
Well, let's kick it off with looking at a few matchups. The first is, of course, the first game of the year. The Buccaneers will kick off the NFL season by hosting the Cowboys on Thursday night. That's September 9th. And just initial impressions, what are we looking for? It's Cowboys, so Bucks, and the Buccaneers, they're defending their title and haven't lost a game since before week 13 of 2020.
Yeah, I think that, whenever you got a player who's Tom Brady's age, you always want to just kind of check to see that the guy who we saw at the end of last year is still there. I think it will be. But the most interesting thing to me is going to be the Cowboys with Dak Prescott coming back from a gruesome injury. I'll be looking to see, the relationship of CeeDee Lamb to the other wide receivers. And one of the biggest splits you'll ever see if you use the RotoViz tools is Zeke Elliott was an elite running back with Dak last year, and he was awful when Dak was gone. So I started the offseason not really being much of a Zeke guy. But where he's being drafted now, the end of round 1 in a lot of drafts, I have started buying Zeke Elliott with Dak back.
Yeah, Zeke Elliott is the only back with, he's with 300 carries a game. He's hit that list 3 times since 2016. And there's only, I think, 6 other players combined who have hit this list. And we talked about Dak Prescott in his absence last year and what it did for this offense. And it didn't help that the offensive line just fell apart, went into shambles. On top of it, Andy Dalton starting. So to be able to get Dak Prescott back, the offensive line is starting to shape back up. My main question is, what is this O-line going to look like? Because even with Dak back, if this O-line is anything like we saw down the stretch, the final even 5-6 weeks into the 2020 season, I think Zeke's still going to be in trouble. I do expect, though, that he is going to have an improved line from those final weeks and have his quarterback back.
So are you expecting, are you inspired by Zeke's ball carrying there, Billy? I mean, yes. Or is he going to be left on the bench?
Well, I mean, he Billy is definitely carrying his balls around like, very similar to a carry.
But he is a value right now. I mean, look at he's like you said, he's fallen to the end of round 1. I saw him go in the beginning of early drafts here in like March and April. he was going in early round 2 at times. And to be able to get a running back with the potential of 300 carries on an offense that could potentially lead the NFL in yards, I think is a win at the end of round 1.
And it's not like they don't throw him the ball.
Correct.
Right? I mean, it's not like he doesn't catch the ball, and he certainly has a lot of touchdown equity also. I've never been a big Zeke drafter, but this year I definitely have. I wish the light bulb went off in my head a little sooner.
Okay, so if Aaron Rodgers returns to the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Jones or Ezekiel Elliott?
That's one where I would mix up my exposure. That's a toss-up. Because the Packers could easily regress from last year, especially if Rodgers, there's him being traded, there's him holding out, and then there's him coming in late. And that is much more of a realistic possibility to me than him actually missing games. So the timing could be off. You're playing an 11-week season in the Football Guys tournaments, to get to the playoffs. So I've got Aaron Jones. I was like the first guy who started drafting him at the end of round 1 in best ball a couple months ago. But I do have some hesitancy, and I think that there's just safer players right now. The guy that what's interesting to me is Jones hasn't dropped that much, but Davante Adams has, and I feel much better about Davante Adams performing than I do Aaron Jones under these circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, think about if Allen Robinson can put up the years he's had with Trubisky and Bortles, I am confident that Davante Adams is going to be able to put up similar numbers with whoever else is at helm.
You mean Blake Bortles?
Whether that is Blake Bortles or Jordan Love. So I'm confident with Davante Adams still, and he's slipping to the end of round 2 right now in drafts.
That's ridiculous.
He was the number 1 wide receiver last year, and he only played off the top of my head, I can't remember. Is it 14 games, 13 games?
13 and a half, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So to be able to get that type of value at the end of round 2 to me is a steal. And I just think regardless of who's at helm, if it isn't Aaron Rodgers, they're going to be behind. And that means more opportunities in the passing game.
You want to hear something that's nuts?
Yes, go for it.
I've got a hack. At first, I thought I might be galaxy braining it a little bit, but the most likely scenario if Rodgers is traded is to trade him to Denver. So if you grab Davante Adams close to the end of the second round, and you grab Aaron Rodgers on his drop, in between, draft either George Fant or Cortland Sutton. So what's going to happen is if Rodgers is too good a value right now anyway. If Rodgers goes back to Green Bay, Sutton and Fant, you get them at value, and you get a huge value on Aaron Rodgers. If he gets traded to Denver, Sutton and Fant are both going to go up at least a round and a half. And Adams, like you said, still could pay off his ADP. So I think mixing those guys on rosters right now is a really interesting hack.
So would you say that if Aaron Rodgers goes to Denver here, would you say that Fant is an elite tight end?
I would say that Cortland Sutton's an elite.
Notice what he didn't say there, Billy.
So Bradley and I have been debating this Noah Fant topic for quite some time. I personally think that Fant is a top 5 tight end, easily top 7. Bradley does not think so, but we have a Bradley and Billy beer bet on this. If Aaron Rodgers goes to Mile High City, I guarantee you Fant is a top 4 tight end.
I mean, Rodgers has never had. He used Tanyan last year, and everyone remembers Jermichael Finley, But Rodgers has never, Rodgers focuses on his wideouts. And the thing about George Fant is the same thing that we said about him in college, is that has a higher ceiling on an individual day than at the time with Iowa, T.J. Hawkinson. But over the course of the season, Hawkinson was the better receiver. There were days where Fant disappears. There's been nothing so far in his pro career that makes me see that differently. But when someone shows you that top-end talent, it's not hard to see why Billy thinks he could do it on a more consistent basis. So I won't say he can't do it, but I also have to acknowledge the inconsistency in his play.
I think he's just buried on the depth chart, or at least it limits his ceiling. I don't think he's fourth or fifth on the depth chart in receiving pecking order, but when you're competing with the Cortland Sutton,
are you saying he's not going to get the balls?
Yeah, he doesn't have the balls. Yeah, he doesn't get the the balls thrown his way in the way that you would hope. And I mean, even over the last few years, Rodgers' pass volume hasn't been there. So even if he moves to Denver, I don't see a huge uptick. We're talking about, Sutton, Judy, Fant, Tim Patrick showed he had at least something there. Melvin Gordon is currently rostered. Hamler, absolutely. So there's at least legitimate competition for targets in this Denver offense. I think Aaron Rodgers, if he goes anywhere, it would really unlock this Denver team and make them immediate competitors with the Chiefs.
I just think that Cortland Sutton, I mean, to me, that's the guy. I mean, he's the guy who, if anyone can be the Devontae Adams, it's Cortland Sutton. But like you said, Bradley, it's hard to do something without balls.
All right, we will shift gears here. I'll pass the ball along to the next item on our agenda, and that's talking about.
You don't want to leave the ball on the ground.
I would not. I need to pick it up, move it along. Tom Brady, speaking of deflated balls, will be making his long-awaited return to New England in Week 4 when the Buccaneers play the Patriots. Look. Real talk here. I think this is going to be a fantasy matchup that's underwhelming. The Patriots are returning up to 8 players who opted out, mostly on their defense. Cam Newton is probably still starting at this point in the season. Maybe Mac Jones is pushing, but not sure. And Tampa Bay has a tough defense, and so do the Patriots. So I think it's a bigger NFL narrative game than, some target game for fantasy points.
I'd agree.
I mean, for me, my opinion is, I'll let the guys on ESPN and NFL Network overanalyze this to death to the point where I want to, get my nuts chopped off. But
people tune in and are like, why do they keep talking about nuts?
But
so you're saying this will be a fantasy impotent matchup?
I would say that, you really have to wonder how you would perform after such a thing.
Oh my God, this is gold.
Oh my gosh, what is fantasy data good thing? This is awesome. Okay, let's shift into the annual triple header on Thanksgiving. We've got the Bears at the Lions. And so I live just a couple miles from Detroit. Most of my students that I teach are they live in the city limits of Detroit. And so this has been a regular tradition. I show my students all the time the Aretha Franklin 7-minute national anthem, which is a classic. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But that's a standard staple for Thanksgiving. Anything to note about the Bears and Lions? Is Justin Fields going to be starting by Thanksgiving?
I think so. I
think
think
so as well.
I think he has a very good chance to start week 1. I think that they're playing for their lives there. That coaching staff. The only negative caveat I'll say is that the coach was in Kansas City when they sat Patrick Mahomes for a year. But that was a team that was ready to win. And Alex Smith, steady hand. But I just think that Justin Fields is going to outplay Andy Dalton in the preseason and make it very difficult to keep him on the bench.
And you don't trade away that type of draft capital, even though it wasn't a lot, but it still was a decent amount. You don't trade away to move up to get somebody who you don't anticipate being your franchise quarterback for the future. Whether or not Andy Dalton's there, you're going to go with whoever's going to win you games.
Yeah.
I
they are a playoff team. So I think that, look, you could see Andy Dalton for a game or two, but I think it's going to be a short leash.
Do you have any traditions at home for the Thanksgiving triple headers?
Can I just say that Bradley has a fantastic voice for this whole thing?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. My Thanksgiving tradition is to be as antisocial as possible, and to watch as much football as possible and make my eating habits as easy on my, when I was younger, I did the cooking, I did the fancy restaurants. I'm divorced now, and really, I just, I'm as likely to order a turkey dinner from Boston Market and just throw that thing out there and say, Hannah, dinner's ready, and sit there and eat for 5 minutes, at 12 o'clock, and then go and, watch 3 football games.
Yeah, for us, I do all the cooking in our household. So I will get most things prepped the night before. Like I'll get all the mise en place out and get all my sides prepared. And then I just assemble on Thanksgiving so I can watch football and hang out with the family. But I love the triple headers here. I also I saw some notes in here about the DFS slates. Love the DFS slates on Thanksgiving. I stacked last year. Wasn't it the Tampa Bay that played? It was Tampa last year, right? On Thanksgiving. Was that right?
Yes. I end up galaxy braining the Thanksgiving slate. I did win 2 years in a row, but last year it was.
So I just had this. I said, you know what? Tampa's going to blow them out of the water. I'm going to stack Tom Brady. I'm going to throw Godwin in. I'm going to throw Gronkowski in. I'm going to throw Evans in. And I think they had like 6 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns, whatever it was, at halftime between all of them. And I mean, I did really
Brady
well.
was like the 4th most owned quarterback.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. I was such a difference maker on Thanksgiving. It set up my DFS for almost a year off that slate. So
nice.
I loved it.
Well, I've gotten a lot better at using optimizers and making rules, and football is the best sport to me to make rules. And the short slates, you can get even more creative to make your lineups even more differentiated than than the other guy. So I like short slates. But how do you guys feel about what do you call those? The in-game slates.
I actually find them kind of interesting. There was an in-game slate where the Packers were playing the Tennessee Titans, and it was like the Snow Bowl. And I was like, I need AJ Dillon, to go off. They're not going to want to rush Aaron Jones out there. Jones ended up having like a hamstring tweak, but was still like rotating in. And I thought to myself, they're just going to pull him in the second half. And that was the AJ Dillon boom game in the second half where he just went off, and I ended up winning a lot of money off of that one. So I think it requires like in-game watching, like to notice those things and to gain an advantage.
I was just going to say, you have to be watching the games because like on Prize Picks, for instance, they have the over-unders that you can pick. for their fantasy points. And if you're watching and you know what's happening in the game and you can foresee garbage time, then the other team is probably going to have a few extra targets thrown their way and a couple extra catches. That second half, score can go up for that player. So I like in-game slates. I play them frequently. I tend to go towards Prize Picks when we're doing like in-game slates rather than on any other platform. But if I'm doing like just...
I meant more just showdown in general, but I couldn't think of the term.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I think the edge there definitely got cut in half last year.
Well, next up, our NFL doubleheader is on now Christmas Day as well. Saturday, December 25th. My Packers will host the Browns, and the Cardinals will host the Colts.
Packers are going to get destroyed.
Unlike Billy, I think that I'll have a chub that day.
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, but the funny thing is, so I grew up in Cleveland, but I was born in Wisconsin. When we moved to Cleveland, there was no football team. This was like the awkward couple years where the Browns didn't exist. And so I just kept rooting for the Packers because Brett Favre was really good. And
wait, hold up. The Browns didn't really exist until like last year.
How did you two meet?
Random leagues. We were in leagues together and we just had a lot of similarities and talking. And then Bradley started doing projections. I was like, hey, you want to do them together? And he's like, sure. And we just started doing projections together.
That's cool.
And then
you guys balance each other good.
Billy was like, how are we going to share these? And I was like, why don't we start a podcast? And then here we are.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So where were we here? We were talking about the Browns.
It's Christmas.
I was saying that they didn't exist until about a year ago. So I don't know what year you were talking about.
That's why I got the baby face,
Yeah, exactly.
I used to have a baby face too. Enjoy it while you can.
I came out of the womb with this much hair.
Hey, how you doing?
Your poor mother. Your poor mother. Honestly, aside from the matchups, my poor Packers are going to get crushed because the Browns they're poised to compete for the Super Bowl this year, and they were really close to the Super Bowl last year, and they added some players on defense that are excellent players, and they're returning. I believe there's one of their second round picks from last year in the secondary. But real talk, like Christmas is the one holiday that I'm like, oh, please don't interrupt that. It's like a magical time for me and my family growing up. And like, that was the magical holiday. And I want to like preserve that for my kiddos. And I don't know if I like Christmas Day football.
I don't either. I don't. Thanksgiving, we all grew up with it. We're used to it. In general, I get what the NFL is trying to do. They're trying to make as much money as they can. I expect to be literally like lifted up by my ankles and shaken until my pockets come out with all my cash, so that they can maximize their profits. But, I don't always look forward. I stopped playing the Thursday slate, the showdown. It's just too much. I prefer, in general, I find I do better when I focus on one thing. And that one thing is the big Sunday slate. And, I do watch the games, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll go to bed after like the first quarter.
I'm like polar opposite here. I don't really like Christmas football because I agree that's a family day. I'm hanging out with the kids. I'm eating cookies at midnight, right? And nibbling on carrots to make it look like reindeer. Sorry if anyone's listening.
And those things. What are those things that are on the trees?
They're called ornaments.
They're like
the ornaments.
They're dangling balls.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was
from the
Christmas trees. They look a little swollen. In fact, a couple of them are red.
Yes. I would you like to see some color?
I think no.
Well, we did have a development, and it wasn't just all of the ball puns. It's that also the NFL has added a game to the slate. First time ever we're having 17 games this season. The NFL season won't end until January 9th. We've got an extra week. Billy, try to make sense of this for us, especially given when the Super Bowl is going to happen.
I mean, you saw my tweet. I was pretty irked by it. I'm like, they missed an opportunity. They had a chance to move the Super Bowl to the 20th. President's Day's on the 21st. Everybody could have had, or not everybody, but most people would have had Monday off, and it could have been, that holiday Super Bowl Monday that all of us have wanted for years and years and years. But instead, no, they throw it on the 13th, day before Valentine's Day, so all of our wives can hate us more for choosing football over Valentine's Day. And then, on top of it,
Billy, we're going to get divorced in the next year because of this.
It's very well possible because
I have an extra room.
Yeah.
For my Onion jersey, right?
There's a pull-out bed right here, and I expect to use it on Super Bowl weekend. So we're ready to rock and roll.
I think they should have the Super Bowl like a day or two before the draft in May. And, just again, it's just, I get it. I get why they're doing it, but so now you've got, think about the real stupidity here is that you now have some teams with more home games than others. You go into a season where you've got one less home game. And, that's a huge difference. You get a 3-point advantage just for being at home. So you're going into a season down that 3-point advantage. And, I'm just not a fan of it. I don't think it's good. And, but then I really liked the extra playoff team and having the expanded wildcard weekend. I didn't get the angst on that because I thought that was, there's always like, the teams that get left out of the playoffs and it's not fair. And so I like that, but the 17th game, I'm just not a fan.
I'm just not a fan of it from a historical perspective. It's going to be very difficult for us to say now, or at least make that readjustment to what does 1,000 yards receiving mean in a 17-game season? What does 1,000 yards rushing mean in a set? What's going to be the new threshold?
I grew up in the 70s when it was a 14-game season, and 1,000-yard rusher was like a real accomplishment. And if you think about it, and I know no one wants to talk about him, but O.J. Simpson ran for 2,000 yards in a 14-game season. I mean,
it messes with our perspective of statistics and history.
It just doesn't look like that much of a big deal because now there's like 6 guys who have 2,000-yard seasons, but O.J. Simpson did it in 14 games.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
I think on some ends, sure, I like more football, but also as a historical data nut, I'm not a fan of what readjustments in my brain I'm going to have to do for, is this player actually good? Did they meet? Because it seems like, Philip Lindsay had 2,000-yard rushing seasons in a row, but he was meh. And I think that showed by him being let go. And like, it doesn't give the same perspective that we would be hoping for. So
what are you thinking? 1,100 yards is now the new rushing benchmark for a successful season?
So that would assume that the extra game would give you an extra 100 yards, which is not the case. 1,000 yards on 16 games is something like 60 or so yards a game. But then it comes out, if you're extrapolating that way, we're talking 10,000 or 1,060 yards, which is ugly.
It's just weird.
Right. Exactly. So it doesn't make sense. And that's my stance.
I think it was already a weak benchmark. And now with the 17th game, I think we should only talk about 1,500-yard rushers.
There we go.
If you can't get to 1,500,
you're a schmuck.
I mean, what? I mean, that's 15 divided by 17. Hold on.
Bradley's Rain Man. Let him do it in his head.
It's like 87 or something like that.
See, watch. I bet you it's right. I'm not even
88.23. That's pretty
I was
damn
off by
impressive.
1%. No, I was off.
No wonder you're doing the projections.
Yeah,
I teach middle school math. What can I say?
Bradley's over here. You drop toothpicks, and he can tell you exactly how many's on the ground. And then
right,
that's how he found Robert Tonyan.
How far is he from Kmart?
Oh man,
that's a Rain Man joke.
Yeah. Oh well, I was thinking about the target and the big red balls outside the front of the target. Reminds me of a co-host. Yeah. Anyways, all right. So bye weeks and their fantasy impacts. We already kind of sprinkled it in earlier in the live stream, but how does this affect playoffs for fantasy purposes? There are a few teams on a week 14 bye, and that includes Miami, New England, Philadelphia, and Indianapolis. So those four of those four teams, Miami, New England, Philadelphia, or Indy, would have the most fantasy relevant players that maybe we have to be concerned about in the playoffs.
I mean, to me, week 13 is the big one in the football guys tournament because, if week 14, if you lose, you get $500 instead of $1,500, which is a big deal. But if you lose in week 13, you get nothing.
So in week 13, I'm looking at Tennessee. So you lose Derrick Henry.
Yep.
Carolina, you lose McCaffrey.
Yep.
Cleveland, you lose
Moore and
DJ
Robbie
Moore.
Anderson.
Cleveland, you lose Hunt and Chubb and possibly Beckham. Green Bay, obviously you lose Jones and Adams and maybe Aaron Rodgers. So that is a devastating week 13. I think way worse than week 14 on just
awful.
A team to team.
I don't understand why they keep pushing it back. They hate us fantasy players. I swear it's designed for fantasy because they keep moving it back. It's like week 14 last year. And then here we are now with all these people in the quote unquote fantasy playoffs in a lot of different platforms. And it's just going to be devastating because quite frankly, most of the teams that are going to be making it to these playoffs, especially in these large format tournaments like FFPC, having Christian McCaffrey and Dan Henry for those full 12 weeks leading up to that is a huge advantage because they haven't missed a game. And with the output that they're performing, 20 plus fantasy points per game, when you have somebody else, a running back 2 or whatever it may be, who's also missing a week, I just think it's a big advantage. But then you get into it. So these players are going to have a lot of, or I should say, these managers are going to have a lot of these players on their rosters for the playoff championships in those weeks. And then the wild card guy coming in who had all their bios already, who snuck into playoffs, may sneak another win in from them. I think it's going to make a big impact, especially on these large formats.
I mean, I was in a league last year where I had it was the 32 team league, Billy, and I had Mike Evans, I had Christian McCaffrey, I had a bunch of other players who were in week 13. And, I mean, there's no depth in a 32 team league. So I was SOL.
I think one strategy I think you have to look at, I think you can, I think you have to use it as a tiebreaker within a tier, right? So if I'm sitting there looking at two guys who I have with a very similar projection, right? I think you have to use it as a tiebreaker. Although Billy's thought I hadn't thought of before, which is that, you get the full 12 weeks. That's an advantage if you're ship chasing, trying to win a tournament. But I think the key thing you're going to have to do is make sure that the second best player at that position doesn't have a bye week in week 13 or week 14. So if you take Christian McCaffrey, AJ Brown is a guy who might be there when you come back the other way. I don't see how you can put AJ Brown and Christian McCaffrey together unless you are literally just punting you're willing to punt the playoffs. And I'm not saying that actually is, again, in a football guys type tournament, week 15 to 17 is what matters the most. And I think you have to look at it from a portfolio perspective of maybe, if you do 20 football guys, maybe you make 3 teams that way.
Well, I don't think you really have to worry about Christian McCaffrey and A.J. Brown now. A.J. Brown is starting to skyrocket up drafts. I've seen him go now early 2, late 1, where before you were able to get him at the turn from 2 to 3. And so I just think that, so a lot of my teams, the beginning from was it March, April, honestly, 70% of my drafts were the top 3 picks. So I have a lot of Christian McCaffrey. I have a lot of A.J. Brown. So I'm looking at a lot of those teams now that are kind of looking, not dead in the water necessarily, but are going to be looking pretty poor for playoffs because I came around and went either Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, but that's best ball.
It is best ball, but still I have, now even I have, other teams as well where you start with, Christian McCaffrey, you hit A.J. Brown and Miles Sanders. Those are all 13, 14 buys now. So with FBG or with main event now, luckily those ADP values have changed because you do that now in this large field tournament in your SOL. So what do you do as a commissioner? This is what I'm looking at. So there's a few leagues I'm commissioning, which makes it kind of interesting as well. So I'm kicking around the idea. I don't really want to have the season end on week 17, right? So do we keep it as week 16 or do you do a multi-week championship, kind of best points, 2 weeks championship for for the final game?
Guys? I don't have that answer.
No, Bradley?
I've seen it done a lot of different ways already. And I think it'll take a little bit of time for us to not just philosophize about it and theorize about it, but to actually see which ways play out the best.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to take years. It's taken, however many years for us to get to this point with the best way to structure the playoffs was 15, 16 or 14, 15, 16 in most redraft leagues. But with this shift, is it better to go back to 2 and 2 and 2 or something 2 and 2? I think we need to play it out and just keep this on the back burner, observing what's going to happen over the next couple of years.
I've already been a fan of, the head-to-head playoffs was always kind of a disaster. If you've ever lost with a really good team, 192 to 186, where the next 2 teams, the semifinals were 147 to 119, 119. And then the guy who got 147 won the league the next week.
Happened last year in a couple of my leagues. I would definitely be for a 2-week, or 3-week kind of football guys, cumulative way to figure out who finishes first, second, and third, fourth. I agree. Well, let's take a look at strengths of schedules now. There's a couple rough schedules here for a couple teams. I mean, look, the first thing that popped up to me was the Steelers, and the Steelers their opponents combined in 2020 were 155 and with 155 wins, 115 losses, 2 ties. Their win percentage, their opponents were 0.574. So, I mean, very, very tough schedule here.
I love that form you did. I would love to see it with the bye weeks thrown in that those teams have.
Yeah, well, Pittsburgh has week 7. And that, I think, is too early of a bye for a team like that.
Go ahead.
They have Buffalo. They have Vegas. So maybe they go 1-1. You go Cincy 2-1. Then it's Green Bay, which is a coin flip right now based on what happens with Rodgers. They could be 3-1. They could be 2-2 at that point. Denver. So it depends on what happens with Rodgers again. And then Seattle. I feel like Seattle's always a coin flip. Like they always play down to their competition. So to get to that point, they need to be a winning team by the time they get to their bye week, or it could be a real disaster. I don't want to speak it into existence, but maybe we'll see some Mason Rudolph.
Ooh, yeah. I think they let Ben play no matter what. I think if they're out of contention, I still think they let him play his last year and let him sink with the ship. I don't think they're going to throw Mason Rudolph in. I don't think Mason Rudolph's there next year.
I never liked Mason Rudolph.
Look, it's gross. I know. Dwayne Haskins isn't much better though. So,
well, I think that I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility that this that the Steelers are pretty good this year. But what's interesting is if you want to bet on the Browns coming out of there, winning the division, if you want to have that bet, with the Steelers and the Ravens having the worst two schedules overall, where's the Browns? Let's see.
Browns are number 9, but so pre-draft, I threw $100 bet at a plus. I think it was like plus 400 on the Browns winning the division, and that was pre-draft.
That's easy money. That's easy.
And now
money.
they come out with the Steelers schedule here. They come out with the Ravens having the Steelers and Ravens having the 2 hardest schedules.
And Cincinnati's up there too. Cincinnati's 6th.
And to see what they did after, like during the draft, I love what the Browns did, and I think I still think they win the division. And at the time, the Ravens were the betting favorites, and the Steelers were 3rd. I bet you now it's swapped, and you have Ravens at 2 and Browns at 1.
You know what's a really sneaky team is the Falcons.
Oh yeah, I was actually gonna write this in the notes, but they were supposed to be an 8-8 team last year. Even though their record didn't indicate so, there's some metric that indicated that they played way below their record. And with the addition of Kyle Pitts, a better head coach, and Arthur Smith, I think that they could be above 500. They're at plus 700 to win the division.
You missed the one guy that Dean Pease, the old Baltimore defensive coordinator who had the Titans playing very good defense, came out of retirement. I'm a big believer in chasing the coordinator. Atlanta, it's not like they had no talent. They invested more talent, and I think that like you said, Arthur Smith is seems like a pretty solid guy, and I don't think it's just people want to pigeonhole him as, well, he handed it off to Derrick Henry in play action. That's who he is. I think he made the most of the talent he had. So I'm not just going to say that's who he is. But the Falcons, have zero expectations. And then you look at this strength of schedule, and they've got, other than the NFC East, they've got and the Bucks have an easy schedule.
Of course they do.
If it wasn't for the Bucks' easiest schedule, I would put it's plus 700 on Atlanta to win the division. I still don't think they do, but as a dark horse, why not take it and sprinkle a little bit on that?
Well, I'm more talking about from a fantasy perspective. Matt Ryan is almost free this year. And in FFPC best ball, where you draft 3 defenses, I've been drafting a lot of Falcons as my 3rd defense, and because I just believe that the coordinator a lot of time gets you. I don't need much out of the Falcons as a 3rd defense.
Maybe 1 week. That's all we need.
Yeah, a couple weeks.
So let's do a quick thing. Let's run through the schedule. Let's just go from strength of schedule number 1 all the way down to the bottom here. We've already talked about the Steelers, but let's hit on the Ravens here at number 2 for the hardest strength of schedule. What does it mean for fantasy purposes? Weeks 1 through 4, they got Vegas, KC, Detroit, Denver, and then down the stretch they have Green Bay, Cincinnati, and the Rams. What's your first thought on their schedule here?
I think Green Bay, Cincy, and the Rams is kind of an even weight. thing for me at the end, because I think Green Bay is not a great defense. Cincy's not a great defense. The Rams are a good defense. That Ravens Green Bay game, I think that has some shootout potential.
Oh, you mean Eric Stokes isn't going to be, a shutdown corner?
Who?
I really like the final two. The Rams is going to be a tough one, especially if you're in a Week 17 championship here, going against the Rams on any of your positional players. I think the Rams have the best defense in football right now, especially their secondary. But I think that Cincinnati's going to give a lot of points. So to be able to have, Lamar Jackson, if you're stacking Lamar Jackson with, anyone else on that team, I think is going to pay off for the final couple weeks.
My one FBG right now, I've got an Andrews Lamar stack. Andrews round 4 and Lamar round 6. I really think Lamar is going to not bounce back to where he was 2 years ago, but I think he regressed past where expectations were. They've upgraded the line, they've upgraded the receivers, and him just having an off season. I think he's my favorite quarterback in that 6th, 7th round range.
Billy, we were so close to taking him last week, but you talked us out of it.
No, that was the auto pick.
Was it?
Yeah, we auto picked
Russ Wilson.
Yes.
That was terrible.
We were doing a live $250 best ball draft with a bunch of the FFPC degenerates.
And they distracted Billy, and he didn't click in time.
And I auto picked, and it was Russell Wilson.
Could be worse.
Could have been worse. Yeah.
Could be the quarterback one for the Bears, Andy Dalton. Speaking of the Bears, they come in 3 here, and their strength of schedule shows the Rams, the Bengals, the Browns, and the Lions to start off the season. And then the tail end, the Vikings, Seattle, the Giants. My initial impressions, I think that the Bears gain some, they get smoked by the Rams to start. Cincinnati, they regain themselves. Cleveland, they get smoked, and then they regain themselves. And I think it's going to be almost this yo-yo back and forth where I don't think Nagy does enough to lose his job, but this could be in the Cleveland game where you see Justin Fields, if he's not already starting. I think that could be a game that the Bears are desperate to try to win.
What if Justin Fields isn't as good as draft Twitter thinks he is?
They're 0-4 and Nagy loses his job.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, maybe not 0-4. I think they're definitely going to beat Detroit most likely, and Cincy, they could be 2-2. But the point is, that's not an easy end of season schedule. And when you're looking at Allen Robinson facing James Bradbury in Week 17, that's not ideal either.
Nope.
Yeah, I think it's a tough schedule, especially down the stretch.
And when you already have questions about Allen Robinson and his quarterback, I haven't been drafting him as much as I did last year.
Well, how about Bradley's Packers here, Bradley? 4th on the list here for strength of schedule. And they start the season off with New Orleans, Detroit, San Francisco, and Pittsburgh. I think that we've kind of hit on this a little bit. I think this is 2 different answers, one with Aaron Rodgers and one without. If Aaron Rodgers is not there, this team could easily be 1-3 to start the season. And if he is there,
they might even lose to Detroit if Jordan Love is playing.
Yeah, I was going to say it's possible that they could be 0-4 even versus Detroit if Rodgers is not playing for the Packers here.
Well, maybe they'll 1-3 because Blake Bortles, Nathaniel Hackett was his OC in Jacksonville. So there you go.
When I was a kid, I always used to get in trouble in school for reading ahead. Look at the 49ers. I've already been really high on them this year. And you look
Yeah.
at those last 3 games, they're overall, what are they overall? Like 18th, 19th?
Yeah, 19th.
Tell the nice people at home who their last 3 games are.
Atlanta, Tennessee, and Houston. It's going to be a fantasy haven.
I mean, the only question is, who do you draft? Like which running back? Do you try and preach a sermon? Are you Tom Hanks and Scream Wilson?
I think by
that's
that time
another.
it is Trey Sermon. I think by that time they're going to let, because Mostert's only got one more year on his contract, and they're going to want to see what they in a full-time role, what they have in Trey Sermon. They're not going to do that the first couple weeks, but I mean, he's the future at the running back position. Him and Elijah Mitchell are going to be a 1-2 punch for a few years. So I could very much see them running all over Atlanta, Tennessee. And I mean, if you play in week 18, oh man.
I don't do bold calls very often, but I have a bold call. I think that Raheem Mostert might not make the team.
Ooh. I think Mostert makes the team. I think that Hasty is probably cut. I think that Gallman, even though he was just signed, could be cut. And they start the season with Mostert and Wilson, and then sprinkle in Sermon. And then as the season progresses, we start to see that tide kind of shift.
They didn't want to pay Mostert last year, and then he holds out and forced their hand. Teams don't always forget stuff like that, especially a guy like Shanahan. I'm not saying it's an 80% chance that he gets cut, but no one is thinking that he gets cut. And I think there's a 10 to 20% chance he gets cut. I think.
Well, and if he doesn't, he could just be relegated to special teams. That's what he did for the beginning of his career.
I mean, if they like Sermon and they like, it could be that Wilson is the one who's cut. I think one of Wilson or Mostert is going to struggle to make that team.
I think they keep them. This Shanahan offense is designed to hurt running backs. And I've said that before on the show. We see them drop like flies because of the way the scheme's built, the way they're supposed to cut and where they're supposed to be involved in this offense. And I think they need the depth at the running back position. We saw it last year. I mean, they were literally just
Shanahan said in his presser, the reason why they drafted Trey Sermon was for depth, because they did a study of the number 3 running backs on the depth chart for all 32 teams, and the 49ers led the NFL in 38% of their running back snaps were from their third string running back.
And in multiple years. Like Mostert was the third string running back when he went off that year. So yeah, maybe you're right, but I'm just saying that, when you look at Mostert in the 6th, 7th round, I have a hard time drafting him right now. Wilson's in free fall. He's going like 12th, 15th round now.
Yeah.
And I like Sermon, but the sad thing is that it's really hard to pick which fantasy assets. I think what you do is you got to, I think you got to pick at least one per draft. I think and I did my one football guy. I took Wilson and Sermon, and I got Sermon before he really started flying up the board. I think I got him in the 9th round. But I think that's the kind of thing where that somebody is going to be running behind a massive offensive line. I think you got to take a shot in almost every draft on one of them.
See, as much as I love my Niner team, if you couldn't tell with the red and gold in the back, I just notice it. And most people miss it. I just don't want anything to do with the backfield this year. I really don't, because of that headache. I would rather invest the capital in like somebody like Debo, who was going in rounds like 10, 11. He's starting to sneak up 8 and 9s now. But I think that to be able to get somebody that is going to get consistent play, who has potential to be the number 1 on this team in the passing game, I would rather wait and get somebody like that than try to play this running back roulette, almost like a Patriots 2.0 backfield now. It really is, where you just don't know who's going to be the star that week. It's going to be a hot hand approach, and I just don't want anything to do with it. We know it's going to be somebody, and they're going to go off, and they'll probably have a few weeks, and they'll probably get hurt, and it'll be somebody else.
I mean, that's what it was last year. It was Hasty, it was Jerick McKinnon, it was Jeff Wilson, it was Mostert. It was pick a card, any card.
Yeah, I have 15% Debo and no Ayuk so far.
Yeah, and that's probably the right call. Ayuk was pretty expensive to begin the year off. He was going like round 5 and 6, now
there's too many other good players in that area for me to take him.
And now players are wisening up. We're seeing the Ayuk value start to balance out with the Kittle value. I mean, not the Kittle, with the Debo value, and they're starting to level off within a round of each other, where it used to be 4 or 5 rounds apart from each other. And I was, hey, give me the later round value all day, and I'm still taking the later round value. But I don't really want much to do with this backfield as much as I love this team. And I know I'm going to get beat by it a week or two through the season because somebody's going to go off, but I just don't have the type of, I guess, patience, number one, but two, I don't want to have the headache every week and deciding who I should and shouldn't start with this backfield.
I think, again, this is a tournament for $500,000 where second prize is like, a
ham sandwich,
a free trip to Bradley's middle school to talk to the kids.
It's a valuable position.
It is, but I just think there's too much upside, and you can get them. I mean, Mostert's still a little too early for me, but Sermon in the 8th, Wilson in the 13th, Gallman in the last round. I don't know. I feel like the percentage of people you're going to cut from that spot on your roster is pretty high anyway. So I don't mind swinging for the fences on those guys, but I'm going to take your thoughts under advisement, Billy.
So we're near the end of the time we have here, but I do want to cover a couple other teams. So why doesn't everybody pick one other team on here that you think has a very fantasy friendly schedule, or somebody that has a nightmare schedule for fantasy purposes?
Let me pick at least an interesting one to start, and that's the Bills. They start with Pittsburgh against the Pittsburgh defense. And while we're tempted to think that maybe a shootout, just given the passing volume that Ben has, it may very well be the case. Given what we saw, what happened to the Browns last year in the playoff game, those are two teams who are fighting from the beginning. They really want to prove themselves. So that could be an interesting start. And then going to Miami, that's going to be tough. Facing a Washington team that is, Billy, you said, who is the best defense? You said,
last year was the Rams.
Yeah, you said the Rams was the best defense. I think going into this year, Washington is at least in the conversation, if not the number one. But then they get a really cakewalk Houston in week 4. So I think it's going to be tough until you get to Houston. But at the end, you got Carolina, New England, Atlanta. New England could be starting Mac Jones at that point, and it could be all bad. I am not a Darnold believer, and Atlanta, man, this could be a real nice end of year schedule for the Bills.
How about you, Todd?
I think the team I want to highlight is the Panthers. They've got the 26th best schedule, but they finish with Buffalo, Tampa, and New Orleans, all top 5 to 7 defenses. So, and then you also have to deal with the week 13 bye. So I think in leagues where but they start with the Jets, New Orleans, Houston, and Dallas, some pretty awful defenses. So I think in leagues where you do have trading, load up on your Panthers and trade them after week 4. And in other leagues, I mean, a week 13 bye and then you come out with those last 3 games. I mean, that's really tough. That's really a tough go.
So mine's very similar here. It's the Titans. And same scenario. They have that week 13 bye, and then they come out and they face Pittsburgh, San Francisco, and Miami. And Miami's another dark horse who I think could be one of the best defenses in the NFL. We saw them last year, what they did and they added to that defense. And then San Francisco gets back Bosa this year, and we're going to have a healthy front. So I think it's going to be people are going to be loading up on Derrick Henry this year again, based upon what he's done for the last couple of years. And I'm going to come out and say it. And I even did this last year during our Prize Pick shows. I faded Derrick Henry on a couple games, and I'm actually fading Derrick Henry this year. Not fully, but I'm just going to say I think his strength of schedule is going to hurt. They're not going to be able to throw the ball as much, and then to have that schedule down the stretch for fantasy playoffs and championships, it's going to be tough.
And they lost Arthur Smith, their offensive coordinator, who, as we mentioned before, optimizes the offense. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
And they lost Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith. That just might not be as good of an offense this year.
Oh, Corey Davis.
I mean, the Ferk Daddy is gonna step right in.
I keep hitting the Billy Bradley landmines, don't I?
Oh, you have no idea about my love for Corey Davis. I was a truther out of college, and I didn't care if he failed the first 4 years essentially, and he finally broke the curve, and I rejoiced. It was all my 20 shares and all my dynasty leagues paid off finally. Well, that's the conclusion here. Todd, before we end, is there anything you want to throw out there? Is there anything you want to plug?
No, the ball started in your court, and I think this show was the nuts, and I think you guys are real big up and comers, and I really enjoy what you do. And anytime you want to have me on, I will try and keep the puns to at least a little bit less than this time.
Well, this was just an opportunity we couldn't pass up,
Yeah, it's not every day that one of us gets a vasectomy, so I think that it was well played, and
it was a cut above the normal show.
Yes, it was, and I welcome the ball puns for this show. I expected it, quite frankly,
but it was a good slice of life.
It was a good slice of life and a good slice of information for the show.
And we stitched everything together, and
Oh God, that's it. All right, everybody, that's enough of the Billy Ball puns here. I want to thank Todd for joining us tonight. I had a blast.
Thank you, Todd.
I appreciate the support that you have shown me as well as our show. And for all of those who are watching, make sure to tune in next week for our Prize Picks Future Show with guest Brett Johnson from Prize Picks. And on next week's show, we will be giving away 2 free entries at Prize Picks live on the show for a chance to win $100 each. You will need to be live and comment live and pick your favorite lines that we mentioned. And then at random, we will pick a winner and get your email and get you some free entries. So
Bradley was quicker with that one than me.
What's that?
I pick a winner. You can pick your friends and you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your friend's nose.
I mean,
that's the deal.
Well, it's like the old George Carlin joke. Why is it okay to prick your finger, but you can't finger your prick?
It hurts to laugh, but it's so funny. All right, everybody. I gotta clip that. We're clipping that. We're gonna clip that. That's going on Twitter and YouTube lately. That's funny.
Oh boy.
All right. Well, that's it, everybody.
I hope I didn't break any house rules, YouTube rules.
No, we're golden.
I hope we don't have to put like an X over the pod.
I'm just gonna have to mark that this content has explicit material not meant for kids.
Yeah.
Bill, you do that every week anyways.
That's because I drink and swear every show. So I'm like, no, not meant for kids. All right, guys.
I'm gonna have to. I've had Billy on, but I think the next time we have you on, Billy, we got to drag Bradley along.
Let's do it. Well,
awesome. I'm game.
We're like yin and yang here. He balances me out and he levels me down, and I put him outside his comfort zone at times.
I give him all of my facial hair.
Yes, that's true.
I send it to him via snail mail. I'm in Michigan. He's in Oregon. Just make it happen.
You're as smooth as a ball.
Babyface
Someone
assassin.
say that.
The babyface assassin. All right, guys. Have a good night.